All right. Well, here we go. A little bit of technical issues. I think we're live. I hope we're live. I'm looking at my YouTube and it does show us out there, Arlen. So my suspicion, my speculation is despite my my mess up earlier to get this program on correctly, it does seem to be working. How you doing today, by the way?
Pretty good. I was able to do my exercise class in the morning and still have time to do this show. I apologize for making you think I was going to come on Tuesday when I made too many appointments, so I had to switch to Monday, and I'm glad you were able to accommodate me this morning.
A lot of confusion all the time, and that's certainly more on me than anyone else, but looks like we're going, so that's the positive. Arlen, I do really want to focus today. I mean, the fact that you were going to be on Tuesday rather than today does cause a little bit of issue with the logistics, only because my focus in today's program is going to be my trip to Seattle. But I think that works for us because, you know, the event was Fight the Rich organizing conference, and specifically Fight the Rich. And there are two parties, and you're pretty closely associated on this program with one of the two parties. I guess I think it's fair to say you've defended it. I mean, you're willing to take them on and criticize them, and you've told me that you believe in alternatives, but you're not going to get full bore behind an alternative until it's viable. Is that fair to say, or is that not fair? Maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, the problem is there's only two parties, and the Republicans are totally worthless, totally destructive. So that leaves only the Democrats, and they've got a lot of problems too, but they're the only party that can take down the Republicans.
See, I don't understand that argument because what that implies, or what that actually presupposes, is that ultimately the Republicans are the problem, and while the Democrats may be far from ideal, still, they're decent, they're okay, they're pretty much on the side of the American people. And I don't see the problem in our politics that way. I see the problem as both parties are the problem in our political system. They're both controlled by the billionaire class. We can get into why that happened. Neither one is on the side of the American people. Neither one is for peace. Neither one is for the environment. Neither one will do anything for anybody if they aren't absolutely forced to do it, except for the people that line their pockets and promise them huge paydays and giant parachutes as soon as they leave office.
I can't believe you're saying they don't care about the environment, about the climate, about healthcare and all these things, because they do and certainly the Republicans absolutely not at all. At least the Democrats somewhat. But you are right in the fact that Democrats are still controlled by the big corporations and the billionaires, and they take donations from those people and give them pretty much what they want. So the Democratic Party has to change, I agree, but at least there's something there. There's a few people there who care about the American people, in my opinion.
How do you make the Democratic Party change if you take the position that we have to support the Democrats because the Republicans are so much worse? Why would the Democrat Party ever change if the attitude of many of its supporters is, well, we need to fiddle around the edges to make ourselves a little better, but in the end, we're all going to vote for the Democrats anyway because the alternative is that much worse?
Well, I hope the Democrats at least learned a lesson from the last election, that they really have to do a lot more to change to get the American people on their side. And, I don't know what form that will take or how long it'll take, but, that's what they have to do. They have to make some major changes. I hope they do. There are, decent people in the Democratic Party who do care about the people, as opposed to the Republican Party. I don't think anybody cares about the average person in the Republican Party. So that's kind of what I'm saying, Al. I like the Democratic Party is much better, but it's got a long way to go.
All right. I would say if it's not quite as bad as the Republicans, that's the best you could say for it. So I was in Seattle for the Workers' Strike Back Conference. And before we talk about that, I just wanted to show a picture of my little coffee maker that I have at home. I drank my coffee this morning, although it was actually close to afternoon because I'm still sort of on West Coast time. And you can see most of that coffee is drunk. And Seattle, of course, is known for its great coffee, right? They're Seattle's best coffee, and it's the home of Starbucks. I've noticed whenever I travel, except maybe to France, to Paris or France generally, the coffee I find always terrible. I never enjoy coffee that's not my own coffee. So my French press coffee, I was drinking it this morning. I thought it's so good. It's not bitter. It's not overcooked. It's not burnt. It doesn't have that sort of after flavor in your mouth. It was just so delicious. And I just buy the cheapest coffee from Costco, the Kirkland brand, or it's not my fancy coffee that's like made on some mountain or something. Maybe it is, I don't know, but just the Columbia Supremo or what have you from Costco. And I just want to say, I really enjoy that coffee, and it's much cheaper than any other coffee you can buy.
Well, great. Unfortunately, for me at least, I'm in the minority. I don't drink coffee at all. I just never liked the taste. So I'm a hot chocolate fan, and that's what I'm drinking as we speak.
Well, that's very healthy of you, I guess, not to drink coffee, although from what I understand, it's not really bad for you. The chocolate, though, that's caloric, Arlen, but you have certainly bucked the fear of gaining weight. It's not a problem for you, so I guess you drink.
It's a lot better than coffee for me because it tastes a lot better.
Yeah, I don't like sweets. Never got the sweet tooth, which I think is very fortunate. Okay, let's get right to the conference. So I have some videos. I did not record these videos. These were done by the conference itself, I think. And there were a bunch of different podcasters and live streamers who were involved in producing it. I was not, of course, asked, unfortunately, but maybe that'll change one day. We'll see. But not that I'm bitter, not that I'm angry about it. I was perfectly content to fulfill the role I did. But I want to play just a few clips and get your thoughts, Arlen, because this really goes to the heart of our debate over whether the Democratic Party can be a change agent or if we must utterly reject it.
Well, Hal, can I ask one major question, and that is, who is putting on this conference? Who's running it? And that's important, I think.
Can you see the screen? Because it should show you there. This is Workers Strike Back. And the three featured speakers the first day were Jill Stein, Chris Hedges, and Shama Sawant. I only have some clips of Hedges. I won't show the other two because what he had to say I thought was most pointed. Workers Strike Back is a group that was largely founded by Shama Sawant. I don't know if you know who she is. She was a Seattle City Council member who bucked both parties and really pushed very aggressively for pro-worker legislation, which she got passed, including a $15 minimum wage. Seattle may have been the first city to really pass that. They have now what they call an Amazon tax, which was an enormous fight. She had to take on both the Democratic and Republican parties. The Democrats who control the city were completely resistant to any added tax on Amazon or any big corporations in the city. They were pressuring her to stop. They were doing everything possible to take her down in service to the billionaire class, and she was able to defeat them. Ultimately, she started this group, which is goal is to build a worker-centered movement that has its own party that does not beholden in any way to Democrats.
I'm interested in hearing, what you heard at the conference and what you got out of it. I'm a big fan of Chris Hedges. I'll tell you that. I like his writing, liked it for years. Jill Stein, I like her views. I don't think she shouldn't have run for president, maybe. And then I'm not familiar with the other person, but I do want to.
Well, I'm surprised because Chris Hedges was an outspoken supporter of Jill Stein and consistently railed against Harris Biden and considers them to be as bad as Trump or almost as bad. So I'm surprised to hear you say you like Hedges because he was just like Stein. He was a complete anti-Democrat.
Yeah, I recognize he's very radical, progressive, and but a lot of what he says is true, and I like what he says a lot of the time. So I'm certainly going to listen to him.
All right, well, I'll play this clip now. To be fair, to you and to me. I don't agree with everything that Hedges says here. I don't think he's completely right, but I think it's important to discuss. So here we go. Let's see. Why are we not getting this? I think
have been cemented into place. Our democracy cratered years ago. All Trump has to do to establish a naked police state is flip a switch, and he will. The worse reality becomes, the less a beleaguered population wants to hear about it, I wrote at the conclusion of Empire of Illusion, and the more it distracts itself with squalid pseudo-events of celebrity breakdowns, gossip, and trivia. These are the debauched revels of a dying civilization. The system is not reformable. Either we obstruct in the only form left to us, which is mass mobilization, acts of sustained civil disobedience, especially the strike, or we are frog-marched into serfdom.
All right, I want to stop it right there. So he says, well, you heard everything he said. Basically, there's no hope through elections, through democratic processes to reclaim our democracy from the oligarchs, from the billionaire class. Do you agree with that? Because I'm skeptical about that statement.
Well, I've questioned, our electoral chances of the Democratic Party next time around with Trump in control. I don't know if there's going to be a legitimate election. And then I think that there is something to be said about mass mobilization, because if Trump keeps going as doing the crazy things he's been doing and the radical right-wing fascist type things he's been doing, then people will react, I hope, and push back. I mean, there are protests starting. There are people complaining. There are people that are very much, understanding what's going on, and they're doing everything they can to stop Trump. So I don't know what the answer is, Hal. There's no easy answer.
For some reason, I don't know, you can hear me, but I'm frozen. I'm not quite clear why I'm frozen on screen. Let me just give you Arlen for a moment, and then we'll see if we can unfreeze me. It's interesting that your take from what Hedges said is that the democratic institutions, including elections, can't save us because there's a good chance that Trump will steal the election. But that's not, in my opinion, that wasn't at all what I heard. What I heard from Hedges was that it doesn't matter whether we elect Democrats or Republicans. We lose either way, that there's not a real meaningful difference between the two. And so therefore, only through mass mobilization, mass street action, can we take our country back from both parties. It's very interesting to me that you saw it so differently. I don't know how to respond to that.
Well, obviously as I say every week, our political system is totally broken and dysfunctional. We have the Constitution that says we go by an electoral college and give the states all the rights. And so, all that is happening. And so I question whether our voting is really going to do much at this point. And I think if the Democrats really want to get serious, they're going to have to change considerably.
Do you, though, and then I want to actually kind of shift the discussion very, very slightly, Arlen, but do you accept his framing, which is that the two parties are really just two sides of the same coin? And yes, maybe we get Obama, then we get Trump. We get Clinton, we get W. Bush, then we get Trump again, Biden, Trump. He's saying that doesn't really matter. That's just, mental masturbation or something. Either way, we're losing our freedoms, regardless, that we're moving further and further away from some kind of democratic ideal, and that therefore we have to have a radical restructuring of the policy through mass mobilization in the streets.
Well, I can see why you would like what he's saying. You've been saying it for a long time, and there's a lot of truth to it. I mean, I agree that the Democratic Party has to have, well, let's put it this way. The Democratic Party used to be a decent party when they were more in favor of the worker, more in favor of unions, and gave them, did some positive things for the American people. But ever since the, corporations have taken over, the billionaires have taken over, the Supreme Court has allowed the, billionaires to control everything. The Democrats are in a tough position and they're not doing what they should be doing.
Right. So that's his point, I think, to a significant degree. But let me continue that argument with regard to electoral politics. So Hedges would say, I think, although but others at this conference would have said, I said that there have been opportunities. We have had electoral opportunities in the current system in recent years to make change. One of those was Bernie Sanders, especially in 2016, although he was neutered by 2020 in a very significant degree. But in 2016, he really had an anti-both parties message. He really had a very pro-worker message that, in terms of tariffs, in terms of, really changing the free trade, going after neoliberalism, which he muted in 2020. But we had a chance. Do you think that there was, and the argument you hear from the people like Hedges is the elites would never have let Bernie win. The media was all against Bernie. And I've even heard the argument, well, even if Bernie had won, in the end, he wouldn't have really challenged power. So those are all, it seems to me, kind of excuses or excuses for the failure of the electorate to vote for the better candidate.
Well, I think the biggest problem of all is the Supreme Court. Once the Supreme Court decided that corporations are people, that they can spend as much money as they want, they don't even have to disclose what they're spending. I think that kind of ruined our electoral system. I think there's something to be said for the fact that, Bernie was pushed aside by the elites because he doesn't stand for the corporations and all that. And he never really had a chance, I don't think. So that's the problem.
All right. If you want to join us, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. I don't fully agree with that. The Supreme Court was not in the ballot box during the Democratic primaries in 2016. The Supreme Court did not put a gun to the heads of the feminists who came out and endorsed Hillary and said you have to vote for her because she's a woman, even though her policies are overtly, obviously, without question, anti-woman. The Supreme Court did not tell black voters you have to do what Jim Clyburn says, even though when he says, well, I know Hillary Clinton and she's for black people and Bernie Sanders isn't, even though it was abundantly clear that the policies that Bernie Sanders supported were far, far better for the African-American people than they were than the policies that Hillary Clinton championed. So I do not fully absolve voters of blame. Voters had a chance to vote for a pretty darn good option in 2016, and they totally kicked it away. Likewise, in 2020, voters had an okay option. Bernie 2020 wasn't as good as 2016 Bernie, but he was all right. And voters again kicked it away. And I'll go to 2024, Arlen. In 2024, voters in 44 states could have voted for a good option. And her name is Jill Stein, and voters chose not to. So I don't really understand Hedges' argument. There have been good, decent people running for president in recent years. And so I can't quite get it. I can't wrap my arms around this. Why is it so hard for people to vote for a good candidate?
I'll say once again, it's the political system that we're under. It's what the Supreme Court did. They allowed.
No, but Arlen, but respond to what I just said. The Supreme Court didn't put a gun to people's head in 2016 and go into the voting booth and say you can't vote for Bernie Sanders?
Well, you're right, but the fact is that people have to get information from somewhere, and if they're not getting the good information to make intelligent choices, they're not going to make the intelligent choices. I mean, you had the Trump people, hammering all the time about how wonderful they are and how evil the Democrats are, and so on and so forth, and a lot of people believe that.
Well, I think that was a fair argument. I mean, not that Trump is any good, but just how bad the Democrats are, and the Democrats kicked that election away. But I'm not talking about the choice between two clearly unfit people to be president. I'm talking about Jill Stein. There was a good candidate in 2024. No one forced anyone to vote for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. That's my question. Chris Hedges says, the only way we're going to change this corrupt system is if we have mass strikes and we throw monkey wrenches into the works and we destroy and we break up things, which I'm not saying he's totally wrong. I mean, I get that. I get that motivation. But people have had choices. And why have we then consistently made the wrong choice? And I'm not saying the wrong choice was Trump over Clinton or Trump over Harris, because those were two bad choices. I can't say one was worse than the other. What I'm saying is it was clearly wrong to vote for Hillary over Bernie. And it was clearly wrong to vote for and it was clearly wrong to vote for Biden over Bernie. And it was clearly wrong to vote for either Harris or Trump over Stein. So why is it so hard for people to vote for the right candidate?
First of all, if people voted for Jill Stein, it was obvious she had like one chance in a billion.
But that's because people didn't vote for her. But if people had voted for her, she would have had a chance.
But yeah,
and it isn't, even if you make that argument, which I reject completely, that wasn't true for Bernie. Bernie was actually the front runner. There were times in 2020 when I think Bernie was the Vegas favorite to be the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, but there's powerful people in the Democratic Party and all, that are saying that he's not the best candidate that they want. He's not the corporate candidate.
So why did people listen to them? Why did people listen to Jim Clyburn? I'm trying to understand that. Why?
I'm sorry,
Jim Clyburn, who was the South Carolina Congress member.
Why did they vote for Biden? Is that what?
Instead of.
Yeah. Again, it's the political system. We have no choices, Hal.
You do have a choice. You do have a choice. You didn't have to vote for Joe Biden. You didn't have to vote for Hillary Clinton. And you didn't have to vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. So we do have choices.
I think I did vote for Jill Stein because in California it doesn't matter.
All right. So then why didn't more people? I don't understand this, Arlen. People should prefer their policies. That's where I don't fully get where Chris Hedges is coming from. But I understand. I'm not irrational. I get we live in a world where the Green Party candidate can't win. But even if I give you that one, which I will just for the sake of argument, why didn't Bernie win? Why? You can't just say it's because the whole system is corrupt, because people could have voted for Bernie Sanders and they didn't.
Well, I still stick with this. The system is corrupt. They're not. The information is not out there. There's no convincing arguments that Bernie would be better or Jill Stein would be better. That's being propagated anywhere, because all the mainstream media, all the right wing media are talking about Trump, or they're talking about Biden, and they're not talking about any alternatives. So unless we change the system, unless we take money out of politics, I don't think anything is going to change.
Well, I mean, there's no way to get money out, because without changing the system, it's not that you take money out and the system changes. You have to change the system to take the money out, because the people who are in power now are beneficiaries of the system and they won't change it. So you have to vote them out.
Yeah, that's where the people have to rise up and, do some real strong protesting and demonstrating, because, it's the Supreme Court made it impossible to do anything about our elections. And prior to the 2010 Citizens United, the Democrats were a lot more liberal, more pro-worker. But as soon as Citizens United came aboard, they changed and became more pro-democrat, more pro-corporate.
It's
And
true. They're worse now, but they were pretty bad under Bill Clinton. I believe I looked this up before Citizens United, although I guess there was also a terrible decision, Buckley v. Vallejo, which I think equated money and speech back in 1976. So the Democratic Party's, the way the legal decisions have implicated the way the party does business go way back, even well before 76. Even the courts in 1976, the court has been a terrible, malign influence in many ways. But that said, in 1981, I believe 82, a majority of House Democrats and maybe Senate Democrats, who maybe not in the Senate, voted for the massive Reagan tax cuts that slashed taxes on the rich and ultimately led to a rise in taxes on the middle class. So the Democrats have been a major factor in their own destruction as a pro-worker party.
Yeah, that is true. But, but when you come right down to it, it is those who give the money, who are donating to the Democrats, that they're the ones they're going to listen to. And, when that happens, they're going to get, more pro-corporatist laws and rules, and then we're in trouble. So, yeah, I think that's the difference.
All right, I want to play more of Hedges, but I just want to, before I do that, because it's really more interesting to me to discuss this with you, Arlen, because you're bright, you're knowledgeable. We don't agree, so you give me on some things. So you give me, I feel like I can learn from you, and I can learn the mindset of people who feel differently. Not like to put that in a condescending way, like I got to look inside your head and figure you out, but to try to understand people who don't see things the way I do. So, I think one of the argument that you made about how at least Democrats try to do the right thing, I'm not sure if you said that on the air or off, but one of the takeaways I got from this conference over the past couple of days is just how desperate, how unhappy so many working people are. I think over 60% of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck. Americans are in fear of any kind of health emergency that could bankrupt them, even if they have Obamacare. Americans, so many have given up on the idea of a higher education being a ticket to a middle class or upper middle class life. Professionals, professors, teachers, social workers are living paycheck to paycheck. People cannot afford to get out of their parents' homes. The life for probably more than half of all American voters is one of quiet desperation. And they do not put all the blame for that on the Republican Party. They say both parties, and I think they're completely correct, the policies that both parties have pursued have led me to this situation, have resulted in an America where over the past 60 years, there has been 50 years, maybe not 60, 50, over the past 50 years, the working class share of America's wealth has completely cratered, has completely disintegrated, and they have to work harder than ever. More hours, more dangerous jobs, fewer protections. They have to work harder and harder just to stay in the same place. And again, that's a direct result of policies that both political parties, major political parties, have pursued. What do you say to those people to persuade them to vote for Democrats in the next election?
Well, one thing that you say you like talking with me and I like talking with you is because we're both progressive. We both can see what the problems of this country and what needs to be done. We just have different ways maybe of going about solving it. But I think ultimately the problem is the distribution of wealth in this country. The way it's so unequal, and the rich have gotten richer and the poor keep getting poorer, and there's nobody putting a stop to it, certainly not the Supreme Court. The Democrats would probably like to see it change, but they don't know how, and they're kind of stuck because they figure they can't win without rich donors giving them the money to do so. So, we're in a major bind. There's a lot of problems with this country. But I think ultimately the answer is getting money out of politics. And at one time we talked about that, the American people talked about that. And we had some efforts to, try to make things fair as far as, the rich not spending all the money to influence things. But now that's gone and we need some radical change.
All right, let's play a little more from this clip from Hedges. I think there's some value here. And then I got another clip, and then I want to get to some other stuff as well. So let's see if we can get this for you.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess that was the end of it. Well, I got another clip. Here we go. Here's more.
They are the building blocks of social change. They are our only hope for a viable socialism. They are willing to spend their lives as political outcasts. They are willing to endure repression. They refuse to sell out the oppressed and the poor. They know that you stand with all of the oppressed, those in our prisons and marginal communities, the poor, unemployed workers, our LGBTQ community, undocumented workers, the mentally ill, and the Palestinians.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. So he makes the point, and he sort of choked over the GBL because it's LGBTQ, but he had a little trouble with that because Chris Hedges is not an identity politics guy, and he's not big on singling out different identity groups based on innate characteristics rather than class. But, I think that's sort of a sop to his audience also, as he's going to single out various marginalized groups. But my question to you is, do you agree, and I don't know if I played the clip, but he was about to go to, if you don't stand for one, you don't stand for all, you don't stand for any. And I wonder where you come down on that, because I don't fully view that as accurate, but I'd like your take.
I'm not clear of the question. What are you asking?
Well,
me?
what Hedges is saying is you have to be fighting for every single marginalized group, or you're not fighting for any of them. You have to fight for all, or you're not fighting for any. If you don't stand for all of them, you don't stand for any of them. Let me see if I can get a little more of that. Let me play it one more time.
Hal, you and I are in agreement that, the problem is, the Democrats went too far with the DEI, or whatever you want to call it, with identity politics, when they should have been really working for pointing out the class differences, the difference between corporations and bosses and workers. And the Democrats were not willing to do that, and they didn't do it. And that's one big reason why they lost so badly in the last election.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Hedges would say to defend his position is we can't let the bosses divide us by saying, well, we'll give you the white person, instead of DI, we're going to, we'll say to the white working class, you'll have your privileges, you'll be able to live a little bit better than black people, which is what, was a major reason for inequality in America. From after the Civil War until at least the Civil Rights Movement, a significant amount of inequality, both between races, but also within races, was sustained by saying to white working class Americans, we're going to have a society where you don't have very much, but you'll still have more than black people. And I guess what he's saying is we can't do that. We have to make sure that everyone, whether they're trans, they're, black, they're Latino, they all have, we stand for every single marginalized group. This is where I kind of disagree with that. And then he threw in the Palestinians. I think you can fight for one group. I think if you say, and I'm not saying it's a group that based solely on innate characteristics, but you can fight for a group if that group is clearly oppressed. You can say we have to stop oppressing this group. So that's where I would come in with the Palestinians. They are clearly an oppressed group right now. And my view on that is I'm going to stand with them because they're victims. They're, as a group of people, being victimized. I can't say that about all trans people. Yes, in general, I guess it sucks to be trans. I don't know. I'm not trans. I'm guessing it does. But it doesn't suck to be Caitlyn Jenner. It doesn't suck at all. But there's not one Gazan who doesn't have life pretty much ruined for them because of what Israel and the United States is doing. So that's why I don't fully share his view on this.
Well, I think all those groups that you mentioned, black, white, female, gender, all that kind of thing, as well as the Palestinians, by identifying with those things as the major problems, you're going to get a lot of division. And I think the smart move would be to, again, look at the working class, look at the, look at unions, look at a way to help, make people identify with the working class rather than the bosses. And if the Democrats could do that, and they used to do that a little bit better, I think it'll make a difference. If we, start individualizing each different group, I don't think we're going to get anywhere.
Well, there was a movement, Arlen, I think you'll agree with this. There was we were voting on the bylaws and the goals of the organization. And one of the amendments was to include reparations as an overt goal. And that was defeated. And so and it was defeated on the grounds that the pro-worker policies, the pro-union policies, the pro-healthcare policies that we're pursuing will disproportionately benefit poor workers and poorer Americans, and those folks are disproportionately of color. So these policies do act as reparation or like reparations, but they don't identify people based on race, and that makes them far more palatable, far more popular. I agree with that. I think you do too.
Yeah, I do. I mean, if you can't, focus on any one group, you have to put us all in one big group, which is basically working people, middle class people, and that's the only way we're going to win any elections, I think.
All right, let me see if I can play a little more from Hedges. I know you have a story. We're going to get to that about a general, or actually, I don't know if he was a general. He was a secretary of the Air Force who's very critical of Trump. You and I see that story somewhat differently. We'll try to get to it, but I want to play a little more from Hedges here.
They are the building blocks of social change. They are our only hope for a viable socialism. They are willing to spend their lives as political outcasts. They are willing to endure repression. They refuse to sell out the oppressed and the poor. They know that you stand with all of the oppressed, those in our prisons and marginal communities, the poor, unemployed workers, our LGBTQ community, undocumented workers, the mentally ill, and the Palestinians. Or you stand with none of the oppressed.
So we heard that, but we'll continue.
They know that when you fight for the oppressed, you get treated like the oppressed. And liberals plead with us to believe in the ultimate goodness of the ruling class, the fantasy that justice and social equality can be achieved through their bankrupt institutions, including the Democratic Party, even though, like Herod of old, they repeatedly sell us out.
All right, so I'll stop it there. That's as much as I'll play of that, but I did want your comment, because that's our fundamental disagreement is, I think, on whether the Democratic Party is a bankrupt institution that consistently betrays and sells out working people.
All I'm saying is the Democrats are the only party that we have. I mean, we have no other party that has a chance of winning. So, that's why, I want to change the Democratic Party into a more pro-worker party that'll be more popular, and, working people, middle class people can support it. I think the Republican Party is just hopeless. They're totally for the rich, and I just don't think we have a lot of choice here, unless unless we get money out of politics, unless we change the political system that we use, nothing much is going to happen.
I mean, we've been through this, so I feel like there's nothing more for me to say. And in fact, the other stories I have although I think they're very interesting. They basically go to that question: can the Democratic Party be reformed? Can the Democratic Party even act, or has it acted in any way as a progressive force, or has it only done so to the extent that it has had to, based on absolute being forced to make some marginal changes, which haven't led to real improvement in the quality of life of working people, which is what I would argue Obamacare did, that it really ultimately disempowered working people to the extent it did anything at all, even if you can point to certain benefits that did accrue, which I think you can. So I don't want to go there because I don't want to spend more time on argument which we agree, even if we don't ultimately agree on the solution. But you did want to discuss this piece, and even this piece I think gets us to that same place, Arlen. But let's talk about it anyway. This is your recommendation. America has a rogue president. This is obviously anti-Trump piece by the former Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall. And I have a few clips from it that I cut, but before we get to those, what had jumped out at you? Why did you want to, what do you think is instructive about this essay by Kendall?
Well, I'll tell you, last night I listened to a podcast that totally shook me up. Keith Olbermann was talking about how Trump has changed all the top people in the military so that now he controls the military. So if he does something crazy and the military says, well, you can't do that, there's the military is on his side. He owns them. And so what Keith Olbermann was saying, that he's pretty much, taken over the military. He got rid of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who happened to be black, and replaced him with a junior officer who doesn't have much in the way of credentials. He fired the chief of naval operations, who was a female, and he also fired the judge advocates of all of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. That's all this past weekend now. So, it's obviously what he's doing. He's trying to control every institution in our country.
Well, he is the president. I mean, that's sort of what happens when you become president, is you get a lot of power. But
you don't get to be king. You don't get to be dictator.
Well, he's not really dictator. He's appointing people to his cabinet, and he's appointing leadership positions within the executive branch. But I agree with you. He's gone way too far, and it is scary. And the courts are reining him in, but the courts are limited, and the courts have tended to be pretty regressive rather than progressive, although not always, but generally in our society. So I think these are all real concerns. I don't dispute them. Let me put this clip up where I think I come up where I have a problem with what you're saying, not even really with what you're saying, but with what Olbermann, because it's Olbermann, and more with what Kendall, because it's Kendall, are saying. I just don't know how credible these people are. But here's from the piece by Kendall, which I can't say is wrong. We'll get into why I think he's not a credible source, though. Trump's decision to fire senior military leaders without cause is foolish and a disgrace. It politicizes our professional military in a dangerous and debilitating way. And then he writes, what frightens me is the removal of 3 judges or judge advocates general, which they kind of are the ones who oversee the legality of various actions within the military. And, that's fair. Now, I don't know. Maybe Trump has some explanation for it. I don't know. But this should be something I think we look into for sure.
I don't think it's a mystery. I think Trump pretty much wants to control the entire government. And this is, the military is part of that government. Everything else he's been putting his people everywhere he can, even if it's against the law, against the rules, against the Constitution. This is basically what he's doing, I think, is a right-wing coup against our country. And that's, to me, is, unless we stop Trump and Musk and those people, this country is going downhill fast.
Well, I can't disagree with you. I think we're on the same page. I think I just don't think things are now worse than they necessarily were under Harris Biden. I mean, the three top cabinet members in the Harris-Biden administration, besides Harris, were, well, she's not, I don't know if the vice president considered that cabinet. I don't think so. No, because they're elected, so it's not the same. The three top members of the Harris-Biden administration were all in the defense section, which is Secretary of State, National Intelligence, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of Defense, all came out of the out of the weapons manufacturing industry. To me, that's absolutely terrifying, Arl. And we talk about fascism. That is fascistic, where the people who make the bombs and the guns and the missiles were also the people under Harris Biden who were creating and directing our foreign policy.
Well, let's not forget that at least under Biden, we had Mark Milley. He was the chief of staff and chief of the whatever they call it, and he was a great person, a very smart person. And Trump just recently took away his security clearances and everything else. And there was, and all these other people that Trump just fired. I'm sure they're all decent people, who they're not totally bought off by the corporations, I would hope. And, but it's a big difference now. I think things are going so fast that it's scary to me.
Well, look at what Kendall said, right? He's Frank Kendall. He's the one who wrote this piece. This is in the New York Times, and he's described, they give a little description of him, Secretary of the Air Force in the Biden administration. So clearly he's partisan. I mean, he's a Democrat. He was in the prior administration. So, you're going to assume there's not a lot of love lost between him and Trump to begin with.
Yeah.
What they don't tell you is that when he wasn't in government over the past 30 years, he has worked for defense contractors. His private life, or not really life, but his non-government career has been flacking for and working for defense contractors, military contractors. And I really think you have to bear that in mind and question how objective he is. Trump is getting us out, or he certainly appears to be trying, and I completely welcome his efforts to disengage us from this horrific war that's cost America so much treasure, cost us our soul, the war in Ukraine, and is destroying and largely destroyed Ukraine. And it's been a war that has been extraordinarily profitable for defense contractors, including those for whom Frank Kendall worked. So I can't view him as in any way an objective. Objective. And at the same time, I question the New York Times. I say, well, this institution, the New York Times, is corrupt for not pointing out that Frank Kendall worked for Raytheon, that Frank Kendall had his own consulting firm that represented, whose clients were defense contractors.
Well, I don't know that much about this particular person, Frank Kendall. I mean, just because he worked for, defense contractors, that does not automatically make him an evil person. He may have been pushing back against them for all we know. And right now he's complaining so vociferously, and there's nothing about him working right now for any of the defense contractors. So, I think unless you point that out,
it's a huge conflict of interest, Arlen.
How
he was working for He was working in the acquisitions of the Pentagon under Obama after he had worked for Raytheon. Who do they buy weapons from? They buy them from Raytheon. Our taxpayer money is going to his former employer.
That's what he did, Hal. I have no indication that he's doing that now, because I don't know that he's working for any defense contractors right now. So he's speaking as a private citizen, as far as I know, and he makes a lot of sense. And,
before he became Secretary of the Air Force during the Trump years, he was managing partner. This is from the Defense Department's own website. He was the managing partner at Renaissance Strategic Advisors. He was the managing partner. He was like number one. He was the biggest shot of all at a Virginia-based aerospace and defense sector consulting firm. doesn't, even if you want to say to me, okay, well, Hal, maybe he left them, he went to the Air Force, he became secretary, now he's just a private citizen. You don't find that problematic?
No, I don't, because I don't know that much about him, but I do know that what he said is very true, and it's very scary that Trump is replacing all the top people with Trump loyalists, and this guy, knows all these people that are being replaced, and he thinks they're good people, and this is very dangerous for our country.
But his interest, when he says they're good people, that is based. Right. I mean, can you separate out his patriotic love for his country and his desire for the best people to be in government? Can anybody separate that out from his own, as he uses the term, naked self-interest, as a guy who's presumably made millions and millions of dollars from companies that have profited from carnage, from bloodshed, from killing, from the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Deaths that, by the way, we can now look at and say they were so unnecessary, they could have been prevented.
Well, I think you're going way too far, Hal. We don't know what he's thinking, what's going through his mind, other than he seems to be a patriotic American who's alarmed by what Trump is doing. And let's not forget, too, you always mention the Ukraine war. That's something that Russia started. Russia invaded Ukraine. That's why we're there. That's why we're fighting. And that's the biggest point that Trump is trying to erase right now. He's saying that, Zelensky did it. Ukraine was responsible for starting the war. And in other words, he's lying, and a lot of his people, a lot of his supporters are agreeing with him.
I think the criticism of Zelensky by Trump is overblown. I think it's typical of his petulant personal nature, where he uses attacks on and insults on individuals rather than talking about overarching policy. But Trump has talked about overarching policy when it comes to Ukraine. He's flat out said on CNN, when asked an incredibly, pointed and stupid question, really, well, do you want Putin to win? The response is, I don't want people to die. And that answer was very, very popular. A big reason that Trump won this election, no matter what anybody will try to tell you from the Democratic Party, is because Americans disagree with Harris Biden on endless war with Russia. Americans disagreed with Harris on her complete, unwavering support for the genocidal state of Israel. Those are big reasons that Trump won. And Harris Biden's pro-war, the Democrat Party is the party of war, their policies were driven by people who profited, or whose businesses profited, or whose clients or former clients all profited from those wars. Now, that could purely be happenstance. It could be coincidental. But that's why we have, or we should have, you talked about the corrosive influence of money and politics. Absolutely. We agree. But this is another example of the corrosive influence of money in politics. We had a pro-war administration that was staffed by people who got rich representing military contractors.
First of all, I don't think Trump cares about other human beings. I don't think he cares about people. He's not worried about who's getting killed and who isn't. He's more thinking that if he could get...
Do Harris Biden? Do they? I mean, shouldn't we care? Isn't what really ultimately matters the policies that are pursued? And the policies that Harris Biden pursued were deadly, lethal. They made us less safe. They destroyed Ukraine. They destroyed Gaza. And they made their cabinet members very rich, or the clients of their cabinet members very rich.
Well, we totally disagree on that, Hal. As far as I'm concerned, Putin is responsible. Russia is responsible. They invaded Ukraine without any reason, without any purpose other than to just take control of the country.
Well, what if Mexico had been, Russia had gone into Mexico in 2014 and they deposed, they fomented through their Secret Service revolution, and a pro-U.S. President was kicked out of office, and a anti-U.S. president took power. How do you think the U.S. would react to that?
Well, they would send troops in there. And then
Well, that's exactly what happened in 2014 with the Maidan coup. There was at least a relatively neutral president, I think it was Yanukovych, and he was deposed by the CIA with Victoria Nuland's strong help in the Maidan coup. And that really, really scared Putin, and understandably so. I can see why he was scared. I'm not defending Putin, but to make the argument that we get to engage in real politics, we get to have control of our spheres of influence, but Russia can't do a thing when we meddle in its closest neighbor, is incredibly hypocritical and phony. Plus, we're not trying to Trump isn't trying to give, or isn't planning, as far as I know, there's no talk about giving Putin Ukraine. The point is, could this war have been either A, averted, or B, once it started, stopped? And in both cases, Blinken, Harris, Biden were full speed ahead.
I just see no excuse for Russia invading Ukraine. There's just no reason for it. Ukraine is the closest thing they have to a democratic country. They elected their leader, Zelensky, and even though Trump says he only has 4% popularity in the polls, he actually is more like 55 or 60. So Trump will lie about anything. And what really worries me too is that Trump wants to extract precious metals and everything from Ukraine, and that certainly tells you a lot when you're trying to.
I'm not defending Trump. The point here, well, I am in a sense defending him because I want us not to be killing and promoting death and destruction of Ukraine, and we've been promoting that. The bottom line in Ukraine has been a ruined country, a destroyed country, and we're not safer as a result. And that's the fruit of the Harris-Biden policy.
Yeah, but we're not, supporting Ukraine for any other reason than, we want to stop Russia from taking territory that they don't deserve. And Trump gives every indication of he wants to extract things from Ukraine in order to, make Putin happy and to make, his rich supporters happy. We all want peace, Hal. I don't think anybody wants.
I don't think that's true at all. I don't know why you would say that Frank Kendall would want peace, the guy who wrote that article. I don't see why you would think Antony Blinken or Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence under Biden, or Lloyd Austin. He was on the board of Raytheon, by the way, before he was tapped to become the Secretary of Defense. I don't know why you would say those folks who profited from death and carnage, who sell the weapons, why would you think they want peace?
Well, first of all, you're making a charge that's totally you can't support. It's not sustainable. That the reason they're going into having, supporting Ukraine is because they want to, make war and kill people.
Well, they profit, or their clients profit from it. That's their business. You're the one who said no one wants war. I'm saying these are people who profit from war.
But I don't think they're, doing what they're doing because they're profiting from war. I think.
Well, you don't know that. I mean, there's a good reason you think they would.
We don't know either, Hal. Neither of us really knows what's on their mind. But it's just very obvious to me that we have to stop Russia from gaining more territory and from profiting by attacking another country.
But we didn't stop them from gaining more territory. Our reaction to Russia has led to Russia now controlling over 20% of Ukraine. And at the time when the war began, we could have and should have been negotiating aggressively with Russia. Russia was at the table. They were apparently in Istanbul. Real progress was being made. And instead of helping that along, where there could have been some kind of a ceasefire, some of the Russian-speaking provinces in eastern Ukraine might have either been become part of Russia or been demilitarized. They all could have been on the table, all discussed. Instead, Antony Blinken and Harris Biden said, no, there's not going to be peace. And they sent Boris Johnson to scotch the talks. And the result was another 3 years of killing, bloodshed, death, destruction, and more of Ukraine now under Russian tanks.
Well, Hal, you're making a lot of assumptions which you can't prove or support, that we want the war to continue. We want the war to keep going just to make money. I mean, that's just not. You can't prove that. You don't know that. So
I'm not making an assumption. I'm just telling you what happened. I'm just describing what happened. You're saying, well, what was your point? Was that, well, we don't want more death and we had to stop Putin. We wanted to keep Ukraine from becoming under the control of Putin. But what I'm saying is the policies that we pursued actually led to Russia controlling more. Whatever our goals were, they clearly were not attained. In fact, we've gotten further from those goals.
Well, you're also making another assumption that Russia wanted peace. We don't know that.
Well, they were talking. They were negotiating. They were discussions. I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't have come to anything, but we made sure they didn't come to anything.
But I think there's no doubt that the intention of Russia is to take over the country of Ukraine and get more territory. I don't think that seems obvious to me.
Well, what they clearly want, what they've said they want, is they don't want Ukraine to be part of NATO. And they've been saying that forever. And even Henry Kissinger, who's one of the most hawkish people ever, said, yeah, Ukraine doesn't need to be part of NATO. He said, hey, let's drop that push. And that was where he and Hillary Clinton, he famously supported, this guy who was architect of the Vietnam War, one of America's greatest crimes until, I guess, Gaza maybe, and Ukraine. Henry Kissinger and Hillary disagreed because Hillary was all gung-ho, along with her gal pal Victoria Nuland, all in favor of adding Ukraine to NATO. Even Kissinger said that's a bridge too far. I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, there's no reason to assume that Ukraine would necessarily automatically get an invitation to be in NATO. I think a lot of the other European countries wouldn't necessarily support that either. So, and besides, Kissinger's been dead for a couple of years now. So I don't.
No, but this was before. This was before he was dead. They didn't dig him up and then look into the corpse and see if there was a note like "read after my death, open after my death" to Hillary. Stay out of Ukraine. He didn't do, but he said it. He said it before he died, and they ignored it.
And Hillary wasn't around when Russia invaded Ukraine last couple of years ago. So I don't know that her opinion is that important at this time.
But it was the hawkish foreign policy with respect to Russia, the containment, the idea that we have to confront Russia everywhere, and that the neocon theory, which she strongly supported as Secretary of State. Before that, as senator, and she was very tight with Victoria Nuland, who was our ambassador to Ukraine. Nuland is the wife of Fred Kagan, who was part of the PNAC, right, Project for a New American Century, and big in promoting the war with the war on the people of Iraq. So they're all the same people, and when you see all that, and you see how Harris supported. Remember, she was all in for the Ukraine war too, and you can see how she and Liz Cheney would be so tight, because so was Dick, of course.
Well, I'm glad that she was all out in support of Ukraine fighting back against Russia's invasion. I think that's a good thing. Can you say anything good about Putin? I can't think of anything good. He's a ruthless dictator. Kills his enemies. I mean, there's nothing to indicate that he has any good intentions anywhere.
I don't know that that's relevant. I mean, okay, he's a tyrant. He's a dictator. He does bad things. I can give you one good thing he did. He's provided asylum to Edward Snowden. That's a good thing.
Okay, but that doesn't affect too many people in the country other than,
Well, I think it's very important. Edward Snowden revealed the crimes of the Obama administration. Spying on us illegally, wiretapping our lines, data collection, the massive increase in the security state. And that's a really good thing that he did. And I'm glad he's not in prison. So I'm glad Putin did give him asylum. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not against Snowden. I think, I think anything that anybody can expose about the U.S. government and the type of evil things that we do, which we do, I mean, that's okay with me. So, I won't argue with you about that.
Wow. All right, Arlen. Well, that's going to do. Well, yeah, we've gone over an hour, even though we started late, and I apologize for the tech problems. Whenever there's a tech problem, you can blame me, or maybe you could blame Google, but generally, and I say Google because YouTube is a Google-owned product, but yeah.
I think, Trump may be responsible for some of your technical problems, if I had to guess.
I doubt it. I don't think he would be, Arlen, because I'm not so, he probably, I would think you would think that Trump's a big fan of my show.
Well, in many ways, he might have reason to, yeah.
All right, man. I will see you. Let's just get this clear because we haven't yet. Are you going to be on starting next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, going forward? Is that the plan?
I'm apologizing for messing up this week, but yes, for sure. I won't make any other appointments or anything that would interfere with next Tuesday and subsequent Tuesdays.
No apologies needed. I was very glad to have you today. It certainly made my life a lot easier, and in a lot of ways, this was better for me. And I just appreciate your coming on. It's just more for sort of being able to schedule going forward is the main reason, because I have some other folks coming on and I want to make sure I don't, have double book and all that.
Well, I'm very happy to be on, especially today, because things are going so fast and I have so many things that I'm very, very worried about. Trump pretty much putting on a fascist coup as far as I can see.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good. Since you brought that up, let me give you a response, because there was a discussion about whether Trump's fascist at this conference, and some said he was, and there was back and forth about that. And I go back and forth myself. But one argument against him being fascist, and I didn't make this argument, but I wonder what your reaction to it is. One argument was, let's be clear, Trump isn't a fascist. If he were a fascist, we wouldn't be having this meeting right now. We would be arrested for it.
Well, he's getting closer to that point where he's more and more control of the media. So, I'm not really tied to the title of fascist, but I would go along with right-wing coup. That would be okay with me. But
right-wing authoritarian. So look, I generally tend to defend some of Trump's policies much more aggressively than others do because I think they're good policies. I think peace with Russia is a good thing. I think tariffs, although his implementation, I don't agree with it. I think tariffs are a good thing. So when Trump does things that I like, I'm going to defend them. But I think the argument that Trump is ultimately a fascist, it doesn't fail because we're able to have some meetings and not get arrested. That doesn't mean going forward, he won't try to arrest people who have anti-state or anti-Trump events or anti-billionaire class events. That could happen. I'm not saying it won't happen. And I think there's reason to fear it could happen because at least of his rhetoric when it comes to campus protests, his call to deport anybody who speaks against Israel, for example, is very frightening. And so I think there is reason to fear President Trump as he solidifies, his control over the government, which is democratic. He was elected. He's the chief executive. He gets to make decisions. But there is reason, I think it's legitimate to fear that he could take steps to rein in aggressively our rights, including our free speech rights. So I don't fully buy that excuse for against him being a fascist.
And let's not forget the people that he's appointed to his cabinet, like Kash Patel with his enemies list. I mean, these are people that want to seek revenge. The guy, the defense secretary, and a lot of these people, they want to, they're very right wing, and they want to they want to punish people who disagree with them.
Yeah, we don't know exactly what motivates them, but they spelled it out. Look, I mean, there was a real witch hunt against Trump. I mean, you and I will disagree on this. I think there was a witch hunt. It was the Democratic Party was determined to try to discredit Trump as a legitimate president, and one of the ways to do that was to argue that somehow he and Putin had conspired, and that just didn't hold water, that claim.
Well, they didn't have to do anything. I think Trump by himself pretty much tells you who he is and why he's a danger to the country.
You know, I don't disagree with you, Orlin. I agree with that. I think the Democratic Party would have been much, much, much better served responding to Trump's policies, responding to his actual actions, and by promoting a vision of a better America. But that's something they cannot and will not do, because a better America would not be what their funders, their donors, and the people that their patrons want.
Yeah, unfortunately, what you're saying, there's a lot of truth to it.
Well, and on that note, where Arlen says, "Yup, Hal, I concede you are correct," we'll let it go.
Yeah.
You got anything else you want to throw in on the pile, or are we done at this point?
I think I'll wait till next Tuesday. I'm sure tons of things will happen between now and next Tuesday that we can talk about.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to mute both of us. I'm going to mute Arlen first. So now, if you see Arlen's lips move, you won't hear him. I will be back tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.